I'm sure you are all aware by now that the world is kind of unfair and feels at times rigged. In most places, you'll find just a handful of people calling the shots and being the big dogs, while the rest of us are out here just trying to get by. And in some ways, this is how it works in the animal kingdom, too. As you'll notice that in the majority of countries, the biggest and baddest land predators around belong to just 3 groups, with this exclusive club consisting of large felines, canines, and the Ursidae, aka bears. And if you take a look around, you'll find that this rule holds up pretty darn well. I mean, even Australia, the literal land of nope, and home to straight up horror animals, still maintain this rule, with the current largest terrestrial predator there being a dingo, an interesting looking doggo that is often considered an ancient lineage of dog. So yeah, a canine. And really, there are so few exceptions to this standard that you can count the number of rule breakers on just one hand. But frankly, most of the exceptions aren't all that interesting. Yet, there is one country, already well known for its wacky nature, where the largest predator around is unlike anything you can find elsewhere. And the kicker is that barely anyone has heard of it. Although, that being said, many people have seen it, realize it or not, as it was featured in a movie based off of the country in which it resides. Any guess? Well, here's a hint. This place likes to move it. So yes, I am talking about the one and only Madagascar, the 4th largest island on the entire planet, and home to some of the strangest animals out there. But I guess that's bound to happen when you isolate a chunk of land out in the water for millions of years. So perhaps it's really not a shocker to hear that it's here where none of the big 3 reign supreme. Instead, an unlikely ruler has arisen, which dominates all else and can pretty much be summed up as a giant killer mongoose. And this is Cryptoprocta ferox, better known as the Fossa. Now, before I get too far, I will clarify that this unorthodox king is not a real mongoose, but it does sure seem to come close to one, hailing from the Eupleridae family, which is made up of just 10 species. And like the Fossa, they are only found in Madagascar. And that's kind of insane, as it would be like if all the great apes lived on just one single island instead of 6 continents. And these guys are commonly referred to as the Malagasy carnivorans or mongooses, but it doesn't truly meet that definition, of course, with this nickname having to do with the fact that mongooses are their closest living relatives, with the second place going to hyenas. And together, the 3 make up the mammalian superfamily, Herpestoidea. And no, it's not what you think. And out of these 3 families, only the Eupleridae became a Malagasy island boy, with one study suggesting that all 10 species evolved from a single ancestor that rafted itself off of mainland Africa and over to Madagascar around 18 to 23 million years ago, during the Miocene. And this move, accident or not, turned out to be a huge win for this guy's descendants, as Madagascar was pretty much just free real estate at the time, with there being no strong or even plentiful competition, just plenty of room, leading to some crazy evolution that of course included a smidge of insular gigantism, which our main character the Fossa really took advantage of, and so it ballooned in size compared to its relatives, with the Fossas becoming the largest predator in the entire country, with a modern adult Fossa being capable of growing up to 26 pounds or 11.7 kilograms. So a bit like a corgi. And yes, I know, that might sound a bit underwhelming, but we have to look at this relatively speaking. As in Madagascar, it's a chunky giant. And plus there's more to the story, as there have been a lot of anecdotal reports from various areas, namely around Morondava, that suggest that unusually large fossa do exist, with some reports claiming that certain individuals can be between 44 and 70 pounds, or 20 and 32 kilos, while exceeding 7 feet in length from head to tail, which puts them above bobcats and on par with medium-sized cheetahs, which mind you, aren't that small. And other reports indirectly support these ones, as some people grimly claim that fossa will make off with small children who venture too far into forests. And as of now, none of these mutant giant fossa have never been officially captured or recorded. But these reports are highly interesting, as we do know that a Godzilla-like fossa are within the realm of possibility, since once upon a time not so long ago, the island was home to one that we know for sure, the Cryptoprocta spelaea, aka the giant fossa, a predator likely capable of taking down lemurs the size of gorillas. And yes, you heard that right, gorilla-sized lemurs, who if you can't tell, are no longer with us either. And it's thought that these giant fossa went extinct sometime before the 1400s. However, the anecdotal statements on unusually large individuals has risen the hopes in some biologists that maybe it's still out there, or at least points to the possibility that there is more than one fossa species on this island. And the belief is so strong that locals have even created a name for this mysterious large creature, and that's Fossa mainti, or the black fossa. As along with size, another apparent distinction is that unlike their reddish coats seen in regular specimens, these guys bear coats as dark as midnight. Spooky, I know. Though, this being said, I promise you that the fossa which are still around are still very spooky in their own right, and are absolutely insane in more ways than one. For starters, just take a look at the thing. What does that remind you of? And your answer here should be cats, as you, presumably, are not the only one who noticed, as despite not being closely related to them, fossa are suspiciously cat-like, thanks to good old convergent evolution, and it specifically shares the most similarity with cougars, who you already know are bad news. And between the two, you will find tails of equal proportions, similar body shapes and claws, although in the fossa's case they're only semi-retractable, and then slender but muscular builds. I mean, take a look at this guy. It's freaking yoked out of its mind. And so unsurprisingly, these powerful arms are perfect for catching and gripping extremely unlucky creatures, who then, sadly for them, usually experience the most important similarity between the fossa and felines. And that's their pearly whites, which contain sharp and powerful canines and molars that allow it to effortlessly pierce and dice prey up. And so these lovely features, combined with its relatively giant size, has rendered the fossa a terror to all else in Madagascar. And I do mean all else, because these guys will eat anything they can, with scat or poop analysis showing that anything ranges from insects to crabs to lizards to birds, and even domestic mammals like piglets, goats, and get this, calves. However, the fossa does have one clear favorite snack that sticks out amongst all the rest, which it also seemingly loves to torment. And you may know the answer if you've seen the film Madagascar, because I am talking about lemurs. So I guess the fossa being the party poopers in the movie was actually pretty accurate, as they've evolved to be their most predominant predators, and are the only known animal on the island that can hunt every single type of lemur. And virtually half of all the food they put in their mouth is one. In fact, the lemur eating is so bad and widespread that it has made it literally hard for scientists to tell if fossa occasionally eat fruits or not by choice, as many seeds are often found in their stomachs, and we can't tell if they're coming from the lemurs they killed, or if they actually do eat fruits to stay hydrated and cool during the dry season. And it only gets worse for King Julian's people here on out, because the fossa seem to reserve a very peculiar behavior for lemurs alone, which is downright disrespectful and horrifying, and that's evisceration. Sounds bad, but let me be a bit more specific. Evisceration is when something gets disemboweled, i.e. your guts are now saying hello to the world. And to reiterate, it's only the lemurs that these guys do this to, so it definitely seems a bit personal. It makes it very understandable why lemurs would be terrified of fossa. Yet, it's not just the frequency of killing or eviscerations that keep the lemurs up at night, as another very unusual superpower has turned fossa into things straight from a horror film, and that's their invulnerability to bedtimes. For you and me, when the clock hits a certain time, it's lights out, no discussion, unless you want to feel like complete poop the next morning. But this is not the case for the fossa, who essentially sleep whenever they want, and however they want, as they are cathemeral, meaning they are not tied down to the constraints of night or day, and can just choose to rest when it's most convenient. And because of this unusual sleeping pattern, fossa also end up hunting whenever they please, resulting in the perpetual nightmare wherein its prey can never rest easy, as at any given moment there could be a fossa right around the corner who's looking for either breakfast or a midnight snack, and it doesn't matter how long the prey tries and wait. Talk about an unfair advantage. And this is not the only way fossa have secured a dominating role. They've got loads of other tools up their sleeves, or rather, up their trees, as another essential part of their kit is their insane climbing ability, which kind of makes sense given its prey. And this also means that lemurs, or really any other animal for that matter, are not safe if they climb even very high up, as the fossa is just about as good of a climber as you can get. It starts with their semi-retractable claws that allow them to hold firmly onto trunks and branches. Next, its tail assists in balance, while the strong pads on its paws provide some much-needed grip. And then to complete the package, each fossa has developed hyper-flexible ankles that have granted them the unusual ability to climb both up and down a tree head first, and in certain cases, hang bottom side up from a tree, a bit like a bat. In other words, this predator can eat you upside down, not necessarily an ability you'd expect from a country's largest animal. And its skill to effortlessly scale trees doesn't just mean reaching prey that are high as a kite. It also means that fossa have access to many different habitats, and as a result, they are found throughout the majority of Madagascar, no matter the ecosystem, be it dense forests, open shrubs, hilly sides, you name it, and you'll find them, be it on the ground or in a tree. And really, the only place they don't bother going is the very inner regions of the island, where things even get a little too rocky and steep for them, despite all their climbing abilities. Fortunately though, this also applies to many of their prey, and not many of their prime targets live in these high altitude regions regardless. So no harm, no foul. Can't say the same for lemurs though. And our little primate friends do have another problem to worry about, which the movie also got right, and that's the number game. Now, if you were being hunted by something that was the largest predator in the lands and had absolutely zero problem taking you down by itself, then you'd kind of expect it to show up alone, right? Well, not in this case, as the Fossa like to treat hunting as a guessing game, because you can never tell how many will show up to the party. Now typically, Fossa seem to prefer their alone time, being solitary hunters that bring down their own prey. But occasionally, they are known to form full-on hunting parties in order to maximize terror. And these bands of mischief are often made up of pairs during the mating season, or mothers and their young, and can be pretty darn crafty, as usually a group will have one member chase an animal through the trees, until the poor sucker will try to make a break for it by descending downwards, hoping to pull a fast one on those dumb tree-hugging Fossa. But unbeknownst to it, the other members of the hunting party aren't in the trees. They're patiently waiting on the ground, whereupon seeing the lemur, or prey, they pounce. And you can probably guess what happens to poor Maurice after this. Additionally, while these hunting parties are usually made up of at least one female, there have been observations wherein seemingly only males have come together to wreak havoc. So who knows just how far the social behavior goes. But one thing is clear, it works. And the Fossa's capacity to hunt is so high that they will regularly kill off large portions of an animal within a given area. And actually, this is so common that this is how they decide when to move on. Not when they want some new scenery, but when they've just about killed everyone around them. And considering that these guys eat so many different things in general, they are often considered keystone species, having a disproportionately large impact on their environment, especially when compared to their relative lack of abundance. So simply put, these guys are amazing killing machines. But Fossa aren't all about death. They like to party, like the lemurs too, and actually in a bit more of a freaky way, as Fossa have some pretty atypical mating patterns for a predator. Namely, it's polyandrous, meaning that each female will mate with several males. Sorry fellas. And this is already kind of atypical in the animal kingdom, but it takes things one step further, as it becomes the only known predator where the females will basically set up a love nest that they then monopolize and regulate throughout the mating season. And around these fortresses of love, males will typically show up in varying numbers and essentially compete for the right to enter, often having shout-offs with the competition or getting a bit physical in certain cases. And then depending on their performance, the female will then choose between letting in one to multiple of the guys who impressed her. And here's the kicker. The deed does not always go down on the floor level. Instead, these love nests the Fossa build are almost always way up, taking place in tall trees usually greater than 6 floors, which is their own version of the Mile High Club, I guess. And if a Fossa is somehow scared of heights, it better get over it soon, as they won't be coming down for a while, as these guys go at it for a grueling amount of time, with one session typically lasting 3 hours. Impressive, right? Well, not necessarily, because this duration isn't due to some insane stamina. Instead, it comes down to a rather uncomfortable sounding anatomical feature in the males. And that's a penis which is covered in a boatload of backward spines. So, easy to get in, but hard to get out, if you get my drift. And in a page taken straight out of the hyena playbook, it turns out that the females also have a shaft, so to speak. At least their own version of it. Because starting at between the ages of 1 and 2, their own genitalia will rapidly develop into an enlarged, spiny clitoris that resembles the penis of the males. And this might sound a bit counterproductive, but actually, it's very beneficial, with the probable hypothesis being that this pseudo-shaft could reduce the amount of sexual harassment the females experience whilst young, and reduce the aggression that they face when dealing with territorial females. And as mentioned, it's not just the Fossa who have developed this unusual trait, but they have added their own little spin to it, which has never been seen elsewhere. And that is, after a few years, this pseudo-penis will start to diminish in size. And while we're not 100% sure why, there is the hypothesis that it's to let males know that they've reached sexual maturity, and thus to not scare them off, so to speak. And speaking of mating, there is actually an interesting reason why they mate in the way they do, and that is to make up for their low population density. You see, despite the Fossas being absolute lemur terminators, they're not as common as you might suspect. And this is where the polyandrous tactic pays off well, because if there's not many of your kind left, it's helpful if you all know where to meet up when you want to get some, as opposed to just setting out and hoping you bump into someone. And Fossa females will routinely use the exact same tree for breeding multiple years in a row, making it very convenient for all and allowing them to hit their quotas, so to speak. However, there is something that this system did not account for, and has no solution to, and that's that another primate has taken up residence on the island. Any guesses? Well, if you need a hint, then take a look at your closest mirror, because I'm talking about Homo sapiens. Yes, as you're probably aware, humans live on the island too, and in typical human fashion have indeed made things a bit tougher for the Fossa and the rest of the animals. Chiefly, the harm we've done to them has mostly come through our indirect actions, instead of our direct ones. with the current biggest threat to Fossa being the widespread habitat destruction that is occurring, which is done in order to make room for farms, crops, and infrastructure. And the habitat loss has been so severe that it has resulted in populations becoming isolated in areas that are simply too small to support them, slowly leading to various populations starting to die out. And it absolutely does not help that deforestation also takes away the number of food sources too. And between 1987 and 2008, it's estimated that at least 30% of all fossa have disappeared, leading to them being classified as vulnerable animals. And while this classification isn't the worst one out there is a major problem, which is that some believe that there is simply too little protected and untouched areas left for them, and that eventually the fossa will have no means to recover. In fact, one study even claimed that the entire fossa genus could be doomed in as little as 100 years, based off of how things are currently looking. And that would spell disaster in all caps, and not just for them, but for a lot of Madagascar's wildlife, because they play a very important role in regulating other animal populations, and thus their disappearance would likely throw everything into array. And sadly, not many locals are actually on board with saving these guys, as the fossa have garnered a negative reputation over the years, with making away with domesticated animals, the legends of taking small children, and then also scavenging graves, which are just a few reported reasons why many people in Madagascar have a great dislike for the unusual creatures, often finding them to be quote-unquote greedy and aggressive as well. And naturally, you don't usually try to save something you hate, which is honestly the biggest issue with conserving them. But another problem with the attitude towards fossa is that it's also led to quite a few people killing them outright for retribution. But ironically, locals' hatred for the fossa is sometimes reported as the only thing the creatures have protecting them to an extent, as they're often considered too taboo to eat, with people fearing that consuming their meat will pass on their undesirable traits to them, or that it will disrespect their ancestors, given that, like I said, these guys have been known to visit graves. Unfortunately though, despite the taboo around them, they aren't completely safe from becoming primate food, as some villages still hunt these guys for bushmeat, especially those that are more rural and located deep within forests. And I don't think it takes too much reasoning to figure out that humans are the only animals the fossa really have to worry about. And so if we're able to get our act together, we could save them. Thanks for watching, and until next time.